3D is a super important skill to learn, and in this video, I'm going to show you how a 2D designer can instantly become a 3D character artist by just using Adobe Illustrator. If you want to follow along with me in this tutorial, you can go ahead and download the Axolotl character project files. You can find the link in the description below. So the ability to turn 2D vector art into 3D art within Illustrator has been around for a while, but it was completely revamped with a little Adobe Substance magic back in Illustrator 2022 and was updated again in 2023. A little bit more on that later. All right, so here's our little axolotl character we are going to 3Dify. And first things first is make sure everything is, nicely organized in your scene. It's going to save you a lot of headaches later as we, start adding all these 3D effects on top of this character here. And what I'm going to do first is I'm going to 3Dify the body here. So I'm going to select the body, select the arms, the legs there. And to 3Dify anything, you're going to open up your 3D and materials window, which you can see I already have open here. But if you don't have it open, just go to Window, 3D and Materials. And here you're going to choose what 3D effect you want to apply to your objects here. You can make it just a flat 3D plane, which is not all that exciting. You can extrude it, which is great for extruding text and stuff like that. Revolve is great if you want to create like a flower vase or something like that. But for characters, one of the coolest things is this Inflate. If I just click Inflate here, you'll see that all of these objects that are underneath this body layer here has now been 3Dified. We have this nice shading. If I select this group right here, you can see this little gizmo, and this is just a rotational gizmo. And you can see that if you look and turn around, there's no back half here, but luckily there is this inflate both sides. And if you choose that, it'll inflate both sides. And now we have this like really cool 3D model of our 2D illustration now inflated, and now it's a 3D model. And you can see how I'm kind of adjusting the rotation here. You can adjust the rotation here as well. You can see that everything's kind of rotating on its own though, and that might not be the thing you want. So let's get back to where we were from the get-go. And here in this presets drop-down, there's all these different preset camera views. So you can go isometric, which is really cool for isometric looks. But if you ever want to go back to where you were from the get-go, just choose front. And now what I'm going to do is if you ever want to delete a 3D effect, all you got to do is select your objects, and in the appearance panel here, if you don't see the appearance panel, make sure it's open right there, Shift F6. All you got to do is just select it in the appearance panel and delete it, and that will remove the 3D effect. Now, let me show you a different way you can 3Dify an object. So if I go, and these objects are under this layer, they're not actually grouped. So if I go and I group these objects by hitting Command and Control G, you can see these are now a group. And if I go and inflate this now, check out what happened. It kind of merged all those objects together. And you could also just merge these paths together too, but we don't even have to do that. And now you can see this is one single mesh. If I inflate both sides, check that out. Like to model this, like I'm a pretty good 3D artist. I can't really model this very easily. And in just a single click in Illustrator, we now have this little 3D object here of the body with the arms and the legs attached, which is really, really cool. Now let's dive into some of these settings here. So we have the overall depth, which is kind of like an extrude. I'm just going to bring that down to 0 points. And then the volume is basically, if I just rotate this guy a little bit more, you can see that volume is just like how much this is inflated, like how chunky is this axolotl boy here. So I'm just going to leave this at 85. Let's go to our front view, and voila, we already 3Dified one of these objects here. So let's click back on this object. Here's the 3D and materials effect in this appearance panel here. And so this has just been the object tab we've been kind of diving into so far. Let's go on over to materials, and this is where you can dial in things like your roughness and the metallic nature of your material. You can actually also go into and select different types of materials that come over from Adobe Substance. So you can even load in your own by going over to this panel here. You can go on to the Substance 3D Assets homepage as well and kind of search for whatever assets you want and load up different materials, which is really handy. But I find you can get really nice looks with just this base material and the roughness and the metallic here. So the metallic is how much of a metallic type of look, like fully reflective look that you want. And I like to just mix these together because what I'm going for is, kind of like I'm a huge fan of vinyl toys. So I want to try to get this like nice vinyl toy look here. So I'll maybe do a little bit of roughness, a little bit of metallic here. And you can see that it's just using the color of that fill as that base color of our little 3D material here. So once we're done there, we can move on over to lighting. And this is going to be another huge thing that affects how our 3D object looks here. So you can see that we can choose the color of the light. So say we want like a pinkish color, you can see that pinkish hue is now cast onto our torso there. Now this intensity is the overall intensity of the light source. The rotation is which direction the light is coming from. So I'll just leave it at like, 135 there. Let's bring the intensity down a little bit as well. Height is how high that light is. If you have it at 90 degrees, we're kind of getting a pretty diffuse look where the light is just kind of head on to our 3D object there, which makes it kind of just look like it has a gradient. So I'd like to have a little bit of height here. And then the softness is the overall softness of the shadows and the light itself, which you're not actually seeing anything happen in our view just yet, because we're just seeing like a very basic preview. Now, if you see this little button right here, this is our render with ray tracing view. And ray tracing is just a much nicer render. If I go and I hit that, you can see how much nicer this render looks because ray tracing has bounce light and is just a more physically realistic type of rendering method. And if you go down here, you can choose the quality. It's by default set to low, and I recommend you keep this low. And the cool thing is this actually has a denoiser applied to it as well, so you don't have any grainy renders. And this renders pretty dang fast as well. So you can see if I move this, it'll kind of like lag for a second and update, but you can see how much nicer this looks from that kind of preview look that we had there. The cool thing about all of this 3D stuff as well is this is all live. So if I want to, say, have an arm over here and just kind of move it, we can do that. You can see this is almost like a blob, or it kind of blobs together, congeals together to the body. So I can move all that. I can go to my points here and adjust points as well. So this is all live, which is really cool. It's non-destructive. I can go in to my paths at any given time and adjust this, and it's going to still render as 3D. So let's go back to our body group here. You're going to notice that once I select the group here, that's the layer with the 3D and materials here. So if I click on the body here, you'll see that's not actually where that effect's being applied. So I'll go back to this group, go back to the lighting, and here is where you can adjust the softness and really see that effect. So this looks really cruddy with very little softness, but if we up the softness here a little bit, go to like 75 or something like that. You can see how nice that looks. Like that just looks so beautiful. And we literally got to this point by just clicking a button to inflate this object, and just look how nice this looks. Just so, so, so nice. So let's go back to our front view, go back to lighting. And the last lighting option is ambient light. So it's basically just how much ambient light do we have in the room. And you can adjust the intensity of that as well. You don't want to go too high because this will just look kind of washed out. And what's the point of making something 3D if you don't even have that nice sense of depth? You don't want things to be completely washed out and have like a super intense light and just have everything look flat. So very important to kind of keep things looking very nice. Let's turn on shadows, and you can see that this is going to allow your object to cast shadows. And you can see it's just casting on this background here. You can see the distance from the object, and you can kind of adjust this like so. And the softness is going to actually control the softness of the shadow quality there as well. You can see if we have very low softness, it's a hard shadow. Up the softness, it's going to make the light pretty much bigger and have a softer shadow. You can see that clipping going on. That's the shadow boundaries. You can up that as well. But for this instance, I'm not going to use the shadow. You can see that the height also affects the shadow too. If I up the height here a little bit, you can see that it's just a little bit, it almost looks like a drop shadow. It looks kind of cheesy. So I'm just going to turn that off for now. All right, so the body's looking really good. Let's move on to the head here. And I'm going to go to Object and Inflate. And you're going to see that we're kind of back to where we were before, where we're going to have to go in here and dial in the roughness and metallic and adjust all the lighting to match the body. Instead of doing all that manually, what we can do, let me just grab the head here, delete the 3D and materials. So what we can end up doing is creating a preset appearance that we can then apply to any object, and it will copy that appearance to whatever else we want to apply to, so we don't have to make materials from scratch all the time. So to do that, I'm going to go to this appearance area here, and this holds all of the information, all the effects that are getting applied to this entire group. And you can see it's only 3D and materials right now, and the 3D effect is being applied on top of the pink fill here. Now, what I want to do is basically create a graphic style or a preset off of this body we have here, okay? So right now, I only have the 3D effect. So what I need to do to create a preset that's going to match this pink body material here, I need to go in and add a new fill. And we're going to go in here, and I have this pink color already saved as a color chip there. So there we go. And now what I can do is actually load this and save this as a graphic style or a preset. And to do that, I'm just going to simply just click and hold on this color chip here and drag it over to the graphic styles. You'll see there is our little 3D graphic style here. And now what I can do is click on the head and then just click on that style, and that's going to apply all the same 3D settings, the material settings, the light settings to the head as well. Okay, which is really, really cool. I don't have to redo this from scratch. And so we can even do this to the little sides here. I don't even know what these are called, phalanges. I don't know what this is called on an axolotl. And I can go and click on this, and you'll see that we just wiped out the underlying color there. So for this, we can actually just delete that fill, and that's going to allow for the underlying color on these little phalanges to be taken into account. And because these are grouped together, you can see these all rotate as one. And let's just adjust this a slight bit. One of the cool things about grouping objects together is you can see they're casting shadows on one another. Let me actually move the softness out. See how that's casting this top group here, this top little phalange thing is now casting a shadow on the other one below it, which is really, really cool. Just this looks like you're rendering in a 3D app. And of course we're in Illustrator this entire time, but this is looking really nice. And let's just say we are happy with how this looks. We want to copy this same style to the tail and the tongue. So just like we did before, let's go to our group here, and you're going to see that the 3D and materials is only applied. So let's grab that fill, and let's grab this little pink color here, which is the same pink color that's applied to those individual paths. And we'll make a preset out of this by, again, clicking and dragging this color chip, bringing it over here, grab the tail, click the button, boom, we have that same style applied there. Let's grab the tongue and apply the same style to the tongue. Now for the tongue, we'll just adjust the rotation here so the light is coming from the top, and then we can adjust the softness as well as the height of the light, so maybe a little something like that. And maybe bring down the ambient light or just turn it off altogether. Maybe get a little bit of that ambient light. And that's looking pretty good. Now for the mouth, we'll go ahead and let's apply that same preset. But for this, we're going to need to change the color. So let's go maybe that color right there. You'll see this is all grayed out because we need to click on 3D and materials effect, and that'll allow us to adjust this. And for this, let's just choose diffuse, and you'll see that this looks kind of flat, and we can adjust the intensity there. Maybe the softness a little bit, and maybe turn down the ambient light. And that's looking pretty nice. So our little axolotl's coming along, but before we continue on, I just wanted to ask you if you could please like and subscribe if you're enjoying this tutorial so far. Doing so really helps us out, and it will alert you anytime we create more content that may or may not feature little weird underwater creatures. So if you're digging our videos so far, please consider subscribing. Thanks a lot. Now all we have left are the eyes. So let's go to the pupils here. And I'm just gonna build the 3D effect from scratch here. And I'll go to Inflate. You can see this is now inflated. We'll inflate both sides. Let's choose the front to get back to where we were from the get-go. Bring the volume down a little bit. Bring down the depth. We'll go to materials and let's make some like shiny eyes. So maybe a little bit something like that. Looks a little too metallic there. So a little something like that. Let's go into lighting because of course the material and the lighting kind of have this interplay. So let's adjust the intensity. The rotation's fine. The height, let's bring the height down so we have little hot specular hits in the top right of the eyes. We can adjust the intensity. I'm not actually liking, the bounce light looks really cool, but not for the eyes. So we'll bring down and actually just turn off the ambient light altogether. So we'll just bring down that ambient light intensity. And let's go back to materials and let's see with that brighter light source how we can dial in the roughness here a little bit. So that's looking kind of interesting. Let's move on to the iris here. And let's go to Object, Inflate, and decrease the depth, decrease the volume, inflate both sides. So there they are. Let's go to lighting first and bring up the intensity, bring up that softness. And for the roughness, we'll just bring that down. A little metallic there. And let's make this look kind of flat, so we'll bring up the ambient light and the softness here. Now, one thing we can do to have this kind of pop from the head here is, let's just select the iris again. Let's turn on shadows, and you can see that this is all out of whack. So let's adjust the height and the rotation here. Looks like he's got bags under his eyes. But let's go to softness here. And you can see on this layer, it looks like we turned off the render with ray tracing. So let's just turn that back on again. And you can see now we have this nice kind of drop shadow on the eyes. Let's go back to the iris here. And I like that nice little depth there from the shadow. You can turn this off and turn that on and see what that looks like. So just pretty subtle. And so there we have 3Dified all of our objects. Now there's one downside to kind of building all of this stuff in Illustrator. Say you wanted to create a isometric view of this entire character here. You would need to go into all of these individual objects here and choose isometric and then go to the head and the eyes, go isometric, body, head. And you can see just how this kind of falls apart with this isometric look and doing a complex character. So there is limitations. It's very nice. I'm just going to go ahead and undo all of those isometric looks. It is really nice to be able to build all this stuff out, but you can export all of these 3D objects out to, say, Substance Stager, Cinema 4D, Blender, and I'll show you how to do that a little bit later. But the one really cool thing that I think is pretty incredible in Illustrator is, let's just say, you know, these axolotls, they have little dots on their head, maybe put a little dots on their body, and I don't like this specular highlight. I want a more cartoony specular highlight. So what I ended up doing is I have these little dots that I made here. And the cool thing about Illustrator is you can actually apply a graphic or a pattern or other different paths and apply them as materials. So let's start out with these dots here. And what I'm going to do is I'm going to apply it to the head. So I'm going to go to the head and make sure I am selecting the layer with the 3D and materials effect on it. There we go. And I'm going to go to materials and I'm going to go to graphics. And here I can go ahead and select these objects and go to this plus sign, and I'm going to add these materials, and I'm going to add this material as a single graphic, okay? And now what that's going to do is allow me to choose that graphic and apply it to an object. But right now I am just selecting the dots, so I need to go back to the head, and here I'm going to select graphic. And you're going to see that's going to add these dots as a layer on top of our material. And you might just be looking at this like, okay, wow, you just applied that graphic onto the front of the face. But check this out. You can move this, and this is going to distort along the 3D object here, which is really cool. So I can increase the scale. I can move this along this 3D object here. I can rotate this as well. And there's rotation and scaling options here as well. But just check out how cool and how incredible this is that you don't have to learn anything about UV unwrapping, it's a very intensive process of preparing a model to have materials applied to it just like this. But this is pretty awesome that you can do just that. Now, if I want to apply that same dot pattern to, say, the body here, I'm going to grab the torso. I can go ahead and do that. So I'll just grab the graphic and I'll shrink this down and maybe move this to the side here. Maybe rotate it a little bit, and voila, we have some little speckles and dots on the body as well. Now, I will say that if you wanted this to be more of a pink color, you have to fill those paths with that pink color and then load it up again as a graphic. So let me just demonstrate that really quick. So pink, I'll need to load this up as another graphic. And now I can go to the body here and just go and apply this graphic. And you can go and, like, if I want to delete this one, I'll just select that one, hit the trash can, and now I can move this. And you can see that that pink is a little too like the color of the body there. So, but just to show you, if you want to go ahead and add different colors, you'll have to change the color, load it up as a graphic, and go from there. Now let's go ahead and apply this as a graphic to the eyes. So I'm going to go ahead, add graphic as a single graphic, and then I'll go over to the pupils, and I'm going to click on graphic 3, and you'll see this little circle here. That's where the graphic is. So I'm just going to move this over to the side and just replace that existing specular highlight and just match that with the more 2D texture there. Now I'll add this again by clicking on that graphic, and you can see there's another graphic in here. I can move and place this on the right eye there. And voila, we have this nice 2D pattern on a 3D object that I just literally created by creating a graphic from my existing artboard here. And I'll just turn off graphics here to hide that layer. And just like that, you can create a nice 3D object. So now if you want to export all of this, you can go File, Export, Export for Screens. And here is where you can select if you want to just render out as a PNG, or if you want to export 3D objects, you have to load them in as assets. But if you just want to export the artboard as a PNG, just go to Artboard and you can select that artboard and just export that as whatever image format you want. Very easy, but the exporting out as a 3D object is a little bit more involved. And you'll see as assets, which are basically the 3D objects, we only have the head set to be exported. So what we need to do is we need to do this little dance where we select every object we want to export and go to Export 3D Object, and you'll see that'll bring up the Asset Export panel here. And so now we have our head, our tail. Let's go to the sides here, little phalanges, export, and you'll see that show up there. Go to the body, we'll go to Export, that'll show up there. Head is already there, so we don't need that. Mouth, we'll export. Eyes, we'll export. You'll see those will come in as two different objects. So now we have all the aspects of our scene set to export as a 3D object. So if you want to export these as 3D objects, you'll select all of those assets, choose the file format you want to export as, so GLTF, I'll choose USDA and then go to export. And here is where you will choose the folder where you want to export your 3D assets. So I can go in here and you can see I already exported these. You can see some of the OBJs here. There's the USD. So we'll select that folder and you can see I already have those files there. We'll just replace them. And this will export out each of those 3D objects. Adobe Illustrator is really great for these quick and dirty 3D designs, but if you are really serious about learning 3D and adding that skill to your toolset, I highly recommend you learn a fully fledged 3D application like Cinema 4D, for example. I truly believe that it's the easiest 3D software to learn, and it just so happens that yours truly teaches a Intro to Cinema 4D class over at schoolofmotion.com. So that course is called Cinema 4D Basecamp. It'll allow you to get comfortable enough in 3D to start using it every day, even in client projects. So head on over to School of Motion to learn more. Let's head back into the tutorial. So here are our USDA files, and if I just hold the Shift key down and release my mouse, we can import all of those objects into a single project here. And you'll see, it looks like some of the materials didn't come through, but you'll see that we're missing like our torso. You can see there's some of the eyes there. What's this asset there? There's the eyes. There's the other part of the eyes. There's the torso there. And you can see that you're going to have to manually kind of place all of the different elements here. And I'm not a huge fan of this. I hope that at some point Illustrator will have like a very nice export option that you can export directly to Adobe Substance, or at least have this where objects can just be exported as a whole so you don't have to manually place and reconnect textures and all this kind of stuff. Because it took a lot of work to get to this point in manually moving things around. So that's my one gripe with this, is that while it's very easy to create something that looks very beautiful inside of Illustrator, it's kind of hard to get everything out and have it look the same from the get-go. There's a lot of moving assets around and placing things and adjusting things. So that's my only negative as far as this whole entire workflow goes. But I have to say, this is very impressive that you can get this awesome type of 3D render entirely inside of Illustrator. Now, I'm a huge fan of any software that makes 3D super accessible, so I am extremely excited to see what you can do within Illustrator, albeit in a very limited 3D toolset. It's going to be exciting to see where Illustrator takes their 3D toolset, considering they also removed the 3D functionality from Photoshop just recently. So go ahead and leave a comment. Let us know what your thoughts are of this 3D functionality in Illustrator. And if you're a 2D designer, does this get you really amped up to learn more about 3D? Let us know in the comments section. All right, time to go feed my axolotl. Its name is Axolotl Rose. And if you get that joke, you're as old as me. Congratulations. All right, until next time, go out and make something.